Skyrim holds a very special place in my heart. I have not felt the same emotions playing this game since I first played Breath of the Wild on Christmas morning in 2017, and that says a lot. I love everything from the lore to the gameplay to the combat and even the amazing soundtrack. The sheer variety of things to do and discover in this game is really matched by no other. And the remarkably open-endedness of the game, which is only rivaled by Breath of the Wild, truly is something to behold in terms of other open-world action RPGs. Throughout my first playthrough of the game, I became a scholar at Winterhold. I traveled to different dimensions. I halted a civil war. I joined a rebellion. I became the world's most feared vampire, all before I even completed the main quest. And this is just to name a few of the things I did. It's truly incredible the amount of things that you can be done in the game. However, that being said, Skyrim does take a drastically different tone than the other Elder Scrolls games. Rather than being in a more whimsical fantasy world, Skyrim takes place in a Viking-esque hellscape in the midst of a bloody, brutal civil war. This game differs from Morrowind and Oblivion in the fact that it ditches a lot of the fantasy role-playing aspects that were in those games, and that's a major turnoff. You have comparatively less dialogue than the other two games, and it completely got rid of the persuasion system that Morrowind had, and even the weird little mini-game that you had to persuade NPCs in Oblivion. It just gives you less options overall. In turn, this turns it from less of a role-playing game and more of a Zelda clone, if anything, but I don't think that hinders the experience for me, even though I do prefer Morrowind's system of bartering and like persuading people and bribing people with money to get them to like you, and that actually had an effect on the gameplay. But here, it just feels like you're floating in the wind. Your actions don't have as much of a consequence in this game as they did in Morrowind, Oblivion, and even Daggerfall to some extent. And this is a major turnoff for a lot of people because one of the main aspects of Elder Scrolls is the role-playing. All your actions have consequences, and as such, you want to choose your words wisely. But here, it really just doesn't matter. And for an example, in I think it was the companion side quest when you turn into a werewolf, you could have just not chose to do a werewolf, or you could have chose to do a werewolf. This seems like a pretty big deal, right? But if you chose to not do it, you could have just activated the quest later and done it anyways. It doesn't matter when you do it. Your actions just don't feel like they have any weight to them. These are just a few of the reasons why Skyrim is extremely divisive amongst Elder Scrolls fans. On one hand, it is a great game on its own. It doesn't really hold up to being an Elder Scrolls game. While yes, everybody does love the game, not everybody loves it as an Elder Scrolls game. It's a good game, but does it really hold up to an Elder Scrolls game? It got rid of a lot of the systems people were a fan of. It got rid of the spell making. It got rid of the dialogue options. It got rid of a whole lot of things just to make it a more simplistic, mainstream approach. And that makes it a huge turnoff for a lot of people. And I, to some extent, agree with them. I prefer Morrowind over Skyrim. I think it's a better game, but I still think Skyrim is one of my favorite games of all time, simply because it was the first that I played. It was the first that captivated me in that same way that I think any Elder Scrolls game, any first Elder Scrolls game does to anybody. Now, Skyrim definitely did usher the series into being a monolithic money-making machine, being milked for all that it is worth by Bethesda, and it definitely seems for the past 15 years, all they've been doing is re-releasing Skyrim. All I want is Elder Scrolls 6. Please, Bethesda, give me Elder Scrolls 6. Now, I must admit, I did start playing the Elder Scrolls with Skyrim, so I have a ton of bias towards it, but hopefully I can give an objective view on the game as possible, as objective as I can make it, which isn't very objective. Alright, so the beginning of the game. Lord Jesus, please tell me I get this lore right. Skyrim takes place roughly 30 years after the signing of the White Gold Concordant, which was basically a peace treaty between the Thalmor and the Empire. It gave the Thalmor a ton of control over the Empire, making them seem weaker, but most importantly, it banned the worship of Talos, or Tiber Septim I, which was the first emperor of the Empire. This angered many Nords who lived in the Empire, mainly in Skyrim, because they worshipped Talos and were ashamed that the Empire seemed so weak. This also angered Ulfric Stormcloak, who was essentially a Skyrim ultranationalist. He was the Jarl of Windhelm, and he killed the High King to secede Skyrim from the Empire. Now, obviously, the Empire was having none of this, and a brutally long civil war took place between the Stormcloaks and the Empire. You better be taking notes, there will be a test. Now, this is essentially where the game kicks off. You're on a prison wagon on your way to Helgen. You don't know why. Now, apparently this is because you were mixed up with the Stormcloaks when the Imperials were ambushing a Stormcloak convoy. They captured Ulfric, and they captured a bunch of his followers. Now, it wouldn't make sense if the game just let this happen, right? So as they're about to chop your head off and Ulfric's head off, a big, ginormous dragon comes down from the sky and burns Helg into the ground, which is the city, it's the city that you're in right now. And as such, you're able to escape with the Stormcloaks, and you're on your way to go. Now, when you finally escape the city, the Stormcloaks essentially just tell you to warn the Jarl about the incoming dragon attack. And once you do, stuff happens. A lot of stuff happens. This is where I think this game and other games of its style really do shine. As I'm rushing towards Whiterun to warn the Jarl about this very intimidating threat of a dragon attack, I find some people fighting a giant, and in the process I can activate a whole 3 to 4 hours long side quest involving turning into werewolves and fighting for honor and slaying werewolf hunters. It really is beautiful in its own weird way. But anyways, after you warn the Jarl of Whiterun about this incoming dragon attack, he instructs you to speak to his court wizard, who then tells you to go on a quest to find the dragon stone located in Bleak Falls Barrow. This is important because the stone contains information about the long-forgotten age of dragons, which took place in the Merithic era, which was roughly 2,000 years ago in the game. During this era, the dragons ruled over the Nords essentially as their slave masters, with Alduin, the World Eater, being their head of state of sorts. According to legend, this age ended when 3 warriors, Gomlith, Hakon, and Feldir, banished Alduin from this realm, supposedly never to be seen again. But anyways, if the Dragonstone is located in Bleak Falls Barrow, it would confirm the existence of this era and hopefully give more information about why the dragons are attacking. After you travel to Bleak Falls Barrow and do some side quests along the way, a dragon attacks the outskirts of Whiterun at the watchtowers. Give the court wizard the Dragonstone, kill the dragon attacking Whiterun, and then absorb the dragon's soul. This absorbing of the dragon's soul is very peculiar because only people who are dragonborn can do so. Dragonborns are people who are born with the voice of the dragon, meaning that they can have the powers of a dragon. Now, once you return from killing this dragon, you go to the Jarl of Windhelm, where he tells you all the dragonborn stuff, and it essentially tells you to speak to the Greybeards, who are monks living on High Hrothgar, or the throat of the world, the peak of Skyrim. Once you get to the top of High Hrothgar, you speak to another dragon. Let me look up his name. So once you finally reach the top of High Hrothgar and speak to the monks and learn about a bunch of dragon stuff that I don't want to get into, you climb to the very peak of the mountain where you meet a man named Parthenax. Now, Parthenax is very interesting. He is a dragon, but he was a good dragon, and he helped Gromlaith, Hakon, and Feldir banish Alduin. So now he is the master of the Greybeards, who are also anti-Alduin. So what you learn from Parthenax is that the return of the dragons means that it is the end times. It means it's the return of Alduin, the World Eater, who is prophesied to destroy the whole world after he comes back. So how did Alduin come back if they banished him originally? That is a very good question. You are an astute observer. You get an A+. Essentially, when the 3 warriors originally banished him, they did not actually banish him. They used a Thuum and they used an Elder Scroll to send him forward in time, instead of actually getting rid of the problem altogether. So now with Alduin back and the dragons returning, you have to stop them so the end of the world doesn't happen. Now, this is a problem. You need to defeat Alduin before the world ends, but not before doing a million side quests. Seriously, the game makes it seem as though it is some sort of urgent mission that needs to be completed ASAP, and otherwise the world will end. But that's not really the case at all. There is no real urgency to the main quest. I traveled to Morrowind and killed an immortal dragonborn demigod who was using the realm of knowledge to mind control the citizens of an island, all before I completed the main quest. Yes, that was a side quest. Seriously, for having the imminent threat of the end times literally looming over you, you sure do have a lot of time to do stuff. And this is kind of like a double-edged sword for me. I love having the options of doing whatever I want, but it makes the main quest seem way less important when I can just unclick on the quest and do whatever I want in the meantime. And when you actually start doing the main quest, it feels like it's holding your hand the whole time. It's essentially a loop of go here, talk to this guy, tells you to do something, get that thing, go back to him, tells you to go somewhere else, rinse, repeat, and it's just an endless loop. This makes Skyrim seem more like a linear game in an open world game's cloak. You can do as many quests as you want whenever you want, but each of those quests are in a very linear line. Now, let's take Breath of the Wild for example. When you leave the Great Plateau for the first time, you have the option to go straight to Ganon and beat him, or you can beat the 4 Divine Beasts, then beat Ganon. Or you can go and complete all of the shrines first, get super overpowered, and beat Ganon. But it's not just one straight line to beat the game, and with no other room for experimentation or anything that you want to do. It gives you a lot more freedom. But in Skyrim, to beat Alduin, you have to go through the main quest to do so. There is very little room to do what you want to do and however you want to do it when it comes to each individual quest. And I haven't even mentioned how obscenely broken this game is. I can't tell you how many times I've encountered a game-breaking bug that kind of just ruins the experience for me. And rather than putting actual development time into fixing the game, Bethesda would rather just give the job to modders. They'll fix it, why do we have to fix it? And instead of fixing the game or maybe even making a whole new game, they decide to make the water better instead of fixing the absolutely game-destroying bugs that are in it. It really is sad and honestly pathetic to see how Bethesda is treating their properties. This is where I have a falling out with Skyrim. Don't get me wrong, I love the game and it's one of my favorites of all time, but it's hard for me to say that it is one of the best of all time. Going back to it for this playthrough made me really realize how sort of flawed the experience. It has so much depth but is still extremely shallow. From the absence of many game mechanics to the extremely linear quest lines to the completely broken game engine, it makes it harder and harder for me to justify this game's faults. And I think the juxtaposition between my opinions now after replaying the game for the second time and when I first started writing the script really do show that. I do still love the combat, the gameplay, the lore, and the soundtrack, but this experience is seemingly downgraded from when I did my first playthrough. Skyrim is an incredibly flawed but beautiful experience.